this week's episode, we are incredibly lucky to be joined by British photographer Jack Terry. We continue our discussions on productivity from last week, and we also talk about digital workflows, the exciting world of bookkeeping and accounts, and the power of repetition. That's right, the power of repetition. Sit back, lend us your ears, and enjoy. Good morning, Tom. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Oh, sorry, that's my chair squeaking.
Sure. It's the chair.
It's always the chair. How have you been?
Doing all right. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm kind of having an expensive week at the moment, what with all the building work.
Yes, you and me both. I'm having no building work, just an expensive week. So.
It must be kit then. It must be kit. It's always kit with you. What are you doing?
It is always kit with me. Annoyingly, I have done a system swap away from Leica and I've moved to Sony, which is frustrating because I only did the system swap away from Fuji to Leica a few months ago.
And so how many months before that?
I think that's my system.
How many months before that was it that you swapped to Fuji?
Yeah, it was.
I believe this is. Well, how many system swaps have you done now?
That's the 7th. I'm not even kidding. It might even be more than 7.
I didn't even realise there were that many camera brands.
well, it depends if you include things like Phase. I bought the Phase 1 kit thinking it was going to be the dog's balls, and it turns out if you know how to use it, or if you don't shoot as quick as I do, it is the dog's balls. It's great. But then the autofocus on it was shocking, so I sold that, moved over to the Fuji. This is way after I'd done my Nikon to Canon to all the other swaps. But the Phase is the expensive one. It's the one that made me cry the most. So I got rid of that, moved over to Fuji, which was fine. The Fujis are good because I know you use Fuji, and the GFX system's pretty cool. But it's very big, and the GFX 100's grey.
Would you have preferred it if they did it in like a coral pink or something? Or?
I mean, I would have so been down for that. That would have been ideal. But turns out no custom colours, not even black. No, the reason I did the swap from the Fuji to Leica is I wanted to homogenize, if that's the word, my stills and motion kit all into one. And so when Leica announced the SL2, I thought, here is a camera that shoots 10-bit internal with cool lenses and is a high megapixel body and does 4K 60 internal with no crop. Poof. 10. Yeah, right. So that's the noise I made because I was pretty chuffed.
You were like, mic drop. I found it.
Exactly. It was like, boom, great, done. And then I bought it, and turns out all of these things that camera manufacturers promise you, they're not quite cut. They don't quite make the cut in professional use. So I shot some test films with it, and it turns out because there's no current way, we're recording this early August or mid-August, actually late August, because there's no way of the manual focus on the Leica, for example, is a speed-based system. So if you ramp the lens quickly, it'll rack through the focus faster. So it's because it's fly-by-wire. It's not direct attached, but also it doesn't mimic direct attach. So if you're trying to put a focus gear on the lens, these Leica lenses have got lovely look, lovely color rendition, but actually if you try and focus them, I was having to pull rapidly and then slow down and then really slow down to try and get precise focus. Whereas actually that's a nightmare when you're trying to shoot a short film and stuff. And then there was some aliasing because the lenses are so sharp. And then there's no AA filter. And they're also big issue. Turns out, I love creating software workarounds and workflow things. There was no real way of getting it to tether into Capture One in a way that you could use it professionally on a shoot. So I had tethered it into Capture One and created a workaround in Keyboard Maestro that would then, every time an image landed via the image transfer Leica shuttle software, sorry, this is so boring. Anyone who's listening has got this far, thanks, just bear with me. I had created this software that would sense an image had landed in the folder. It would then activate Capture One, it would move the cursor left one, copy the settings, move it right two, and then right. So now you're starting to realize, like, actually using this
the
camera
levels of nerd,
mate. But also the level of hassle, because if you know, in practice, in theory, it's cool and it works, because, you know, when we're testing in our, you know, offices and stuff on studios, we tend to just watch a shoot come through uniformly. So we're just, the next shot will be the next shot. Whereas as soon as you put a client into the mix, they go, oh, that shot about 6 back.
Yeah.
And you go, all right, cool. So then I would move 6 back, forget to then move the cursor to the end image. So it would then start copying and pasting the settings onto images that had already been ingested. And then the new images wouldn't have the settings applied. And long story short, had a couple of shoots. It was a nightmare. I wasn't happy with it. Got rid of it. So now I've moved to Sony. So it's been expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you've got like I imagine the camera shop that you use see you coming and just clear the decks.
Funnily enough, they really do. There's a little bit of red carpet they throw out on the floor, and they're like, it's going to be good. Tom's coming. I wonder how pissed off he is with the last thing we sold him. Actually, big shout out to your local camera store, Martin at London Camera Guildford. He's always looked after me. He's been very good. So,
yeah, I mean, it does make a big difference having a relationship with an actual store rather than a website, doesn't it? In that degree, when it comes to cameras.
Yeah, I've got 3 really that I use. I use the business team at Wex. Hello, guys. I mean, they're not listening, but I also use the guys for all my motion stuff. I tend to get my motion stuff from the lovely chaps at CVP. Yeah, and I've been using them for years. They're super reliable, great, very competitive, just nice, and they know their stuff as well. If you ring and just want to chat about and get some advice, they'll either go, yeah, no worries, I've got time to do it, or they'll just say, come down to the showroom and we'll run you through it. And then my local camera guy, Martin, is great. So you know, between those 3, I've kind of got all bases covered. Oh, and also I should probably give a shout out to AJ's as well down in Somerset, because I made an order with them today and I'm staring at an email. But they are lovely guys.
They seem, I've used them quite a bit for Pro Photo Kit in the past. They seem pretty good.
Yeah, they're great. And Andrew and Hannah who work there, they're lovely as well. So, you know, I make a point of dealing with nice people.
Support your local camera store. That's
absolutely.
Takeaway.
So there's always going to be some things that a local camera store can't get hold of or can't do, or they can't get hold of quick enough. Yeah. But most of the time you'll find that they're pretty good.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it does make a big difference as well in terms of warranties and stuff like that. I use the London Camera Exchange on the Strand in London quite a bit. Tiny store, like main footfall probably in there is old hobbyists and tourists and the odd kind of Fleet Street snapper, maybe, I don't know. But they've always been really good to me and honoured returns and warranties in a way that if you'd bought it online would have been a bit of a faff to sort out. You know, I had a problem recently with one of my Fujis that had an HDMI port that had been doshed and needed to be repaired. And it's a mixture of dinged and boshed. It's a polite way of saying it was a bit fucked. And basically they sent it back and got it repaired. And, you know, it was under a 2-year warranty that they had. So I think it is worth kind of using a camera store in those situations just for peace of mind if anything goes wrong with your kit. They also do a part exchange, which a lot of people use when you're upgrading your kit.
I wouldn't know about part exchange. I wouldn't have any experience of it.
We won't go into that then. We won't go into that.
It's miserable, man. Honestly, I can't even begin to tell you the past 6 months. Well, actually, when I initially did the Leica stuff, because Leica is renowned for being cheap, and I dropped.
I've heard that.
Yeah, I had a baby in December. Well, my wife had a baby in December, and then I was there for the ride. And then January came along. I wasn't really sleeping well, and I thought that's going to be the good thing. And then a global pandemic hit. Imagine all your work vanishing and then suddenly going, yes, no, I did just spend a lot of money on Leicas. No, I'm not happy. Yes, no, I do feel like an idiot. Yeah. So,
Oh dear.
what I will say with this whole situation is obviously now
Hmm.
I'm a Sony shooter, and all my problems have kind of gone away. I'm very happy, and actually, it's quite an amazing system. Really, I'm very pleased. But what I will say about Leica is the guys here. So Robin, Yumi, and Stefan at Leica in Germany and in the UK, they could not have done more to try and make everything work, try and make me happy and whatnot. So I feel like I've kind of hated on it a little bit, but actually, as far as the service goes, that's it was cool. They couldn't have done more really.
Yeah.
But yes, it still was a colossal waste of money.
So what else is going on in your world at the moment?
What other than crying myself to sleep at night because I wasted a load of money? Not much, actually, Greg. No, I've had the realization after having a couple of chats with some other guys that maybe my mission to kind of get my kit as minimal as possible took it to the extreme where it was too minimal. So I've now had to go away from two cases.
Turning up with your Fisher Price camera.
I was just turning up with my iPhone. I was like, what? No, you don't need lights. It's fine. But yeah, no. So now I've now got some spare space in the kit bag. And if anyone's listening who hasn't watched Greg's kit walkthrough on his lighting bag, for example, it's on YouTube. It's very interesting. There's a
challenge you to get to the end.
Yeah, right. But there's a very dashing chap who's presenting. So yeah, no, go watch it. It's really interesting. But it kind of made me think that maybe I should have some slightly more useful stuff in my bag. So
really,
I had taken a lot of stuff
my bits of tin foil and sticky back plastic and my MacGyver kit.
Yeah, the MacGyver kit. But yeah, no, I just realised that I'd kind of taken out things like my super clamps and stuff, whereas actually, kind of thinking back, they would have been quite useful on certain things. And I've ordered like some carabiners, and I've ordered some reusable zip ties, and like just bits and pieces that could save a shoot or save me a bit of hassle.
Grip's always one of the most kind of, in terms of weight, can quickly add up. But when you're doing, especially when you're doing editorial jobs, saves you having to hire that stuff in, then it can make a big difference having it. And, it basically makes the difference between you being able to sort out a lighting issue or not sort out the lighting issue. Is normally comes down to not what lights you've got in your bag, but what ways of modifying the light that you do have. And that is it. Fundamentally grip, flags, or material of some sort. Things like that.
But it's interesting you say that. So when I was talking about weight, obviously I'm on a mission to kind of cut all my weight down, both physically and equipment wise. But for me, the super clamps are heavy. They are heavy, and for me, I was looking into Matthews, the MSEgrip.com. Those guys do something called micro grip, which actually, for the majority of stuff that we do, and especially now like Profoto are bringing out the B10s and the B10 Pluses, which weigh a lot less, the micro grip stuff is like composite. It's not metal. It's not super heavy. We're talking about, 100 grams instead of 300 grams, which actually, when you've got 5 of them, that saves you a kilo. Yeah. So, the micro grip stuff is definitely worth a look into. And I'm going to order a big set from CVP shortly, I think.
Good stuff. Well, I mean, today's show is a great one for anyone who's wants to nerd off. It's
nerd off or nod off.
Well, I mean, we'll soon find out, won't we? When we get feedback.
Quite. That's it. If you would like to provide feedback, it's info@exposenegative.com, or you can follow us at xnegative on Instagram. Sorry, Greg.
Yes. Although if you have fallen asleep, don't let us know. I mean, I don't think you will. Jack Terry is our guest this week. He is a commercial and lifestyle photographer based in the UK, and he has some amazing systems in place, doesn't he? He's somebody we brought on because we wanted to do a episode. The episodes we've been doing on this kind of stuff have been going down really well and been getting really good feedback because people have been saying there's not much else like this out there. And we talked to Jack about his kind of workflow and the systems he uses, the software he uses, the equipment he uses, and his kind of like mindset towards certain things. And there's some real gold in there that I certainly was kind of interested to learn. So I think it's so fascinating when you hear another photographer and their workflow and their way of doing things, and it kind of especially now with everything that's going on and the fact that people have got a bit more time on their hands, it's a great opportunity and a great chance to actually reassess the way that you go about your shoots and kind of reorganize certain aspects of your workflow so that when things do pick up, you can put them into action and see how much time you save and see how much more efficient you can be.
Well, when in your career, up until when coronavirus hit, when in your career have you ever taken a far step back to look at your systems as we have been able to in the past couple of months? I personally, I've never done it.
Having the time, isn't it? I mean, I don't think I've gone through a period in the last 15 years of being in the UK for this amount of time.
Yeah, you're right. I think this is the longest I've been in the UK now since I was 20, so 15 years.
Yeah.
Which actually is weird. I am posting an image in the next couple of days to my Instagram of a wing out of a plane window because I never thought I'd miss it. Like I never thought I'd miss
people won't know what it is. It looks familiar, but I can't quite work it out.
That's so retro and futuristic at the same time. Yeah, no,
it's put a hashtag Throwback Thursday or whatever it is.
Throwback Thursday. Well, it's a Wednesday, so Throwback Wednesday.
I thought you were going to tease us with a picture of you 15 years ago.
Oh my God! Actually, do you know what I should? I might put it up on my stories. Well, actually, it's funny because this week I did a press shot. I did like a new photograph of me.
Press shot. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, can you
don't wonder where you can.
Yeah, but that one's not for anyone's eyes. I'll send you that one privately.
We'll be putting that up in the X-Negative Instagram feed. Just keep an eye out.
Well, we might have to blur it, a lot of it. Yeah, but
put the little emoji. You choose which one.
With the I did this shot of me. I've not done one in a long time. 2016 was my last time I did one.
Wow.
What long time. And I'd done a couple of interviews and people were like, look, have you got any updated press shots? And I was like, yes, I have this one of me looking quite thin and good from 2016. And they said, it's a bit out of date. And I was like, it's only 4.5 years. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So I've finally done a new one.
It's funny, isn't it, with press shots? I mean, I tend to, the only time I ever really get asked them is for contributors' photo in the front of the magazine. And I seem to go through phases with it where suddenly you get like 2 or 3 magazines in the space of a month or two that need a contributor's picture, and then no one cares for a while. But I remember, I quite often supply them with weird ones from photo booths and wherever, because I find I never want to kind of give anything that looks too serious because I don't think that reflects me. But I don't know. We're not meant to be in front of the camera, basically. So it's always a bit weird. But a few years ago, I got asked to contribute one, and I sent them an image, and then they had an illustrator turn it into a watercolor. And honestly, they turned me into Action Man, but like 1980s Action Man with the eagle eyes and the full-on beard. And I was like, they made me really hench, which was great, but not at all realistic.
They toned you down.
So yeah, it was. I was ridiculed quite a lot for that.
Why do you not have that set as your? Why do you not have that set as your social media image?
Well, I kind of feel like I should do a before and after, and no discredit to the illustrator, whoever they were. They tried. They did me a favor. They definitely did me a favor, so I shouldn't be complaining. But I just remember it honestly looked like 1980s Action Man.
Brilliant. Well, please send me that privately as well. Cool. Should we jump into this one?
Yes. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jack Terry.
That's a very loud mouse click. That's incredible. Like, come on, start the podcast. Anyway, so on today's episode, we are speaking to advertising and lifestyle photographer Jack Terry. Me and Jack went for a drink, and I think I felt like I had met a kindred spirit. Jack, you might feel different.
This makes it feel like a little bit of a sort of online date that we both ended up on.
It does. We both swiped right or left. I've actually never used the apps because I've been married so long.
I basically just sat there for an hour nodding while you talked about software, I think.
I mean, I will have
like
talked...
Most of Tom's dates.
I will have talked about hardware at some point.
No, it was actually my last beer in a pub for probably 4 months or so, and I didn't even have a beer. I just had a lime and soda because we were both driving.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it was really nice to speak to another photographer who we kind of both had young families and both in a fairly similar point in our career. So
was there someone else there? Sorry. No, it was great to actually just shoot the shit and realize that, we were quite similar. And also we both quite liked productivity and little bits of gear and stuff like that. And we quite like lovely old English pubs.
I wonder where you were going with that. So this week on the podcast, then we're going to be chatting to Jack about those subjects: productivity, efficiency, kind of workflows, some of the things he's picked up along the way, some good little bits of knowledge and experience that he's going to share with you guys. But to start with, Jack, could you just kind of walk us through your journey into photography?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started off my career with a degree in product design, so fairly unrelated, although still in the creative field, I guess. And then, having done the degree, spent a bit of time abroad, I sort of realised that I couldn't imagine myself with a career behind a desk. So I, by that point, had kind of found a bit of an interest in photography and just started pursuing that a little bit. And I'd been living over in Australia for a while and came back from there. Met my now wife and got together, but I'd actually already booked a ski season. So I went over to France, and I was quite fortunate at the time to I inherited I think it was about $5,000 I inherited. I decided that was going to be my little nest egg that would get me going with photography. So I bought my first little setup, went out to Morzine in France, and I started a little business there where I'd basically photograph people skiing and snowboarding. And that I just found I really loved meeting different people, and just that kind of the difference that I had that people didn't really have available was being able to, because I was a fairly good snowboarder, I'd sort of fly down the piste and get shots of people actually moving rather than just stood by the bottom of the lift queue,
Mm-hmm.
So it became really popular, and people would just book me for like half a day at a time. And I'd have to go up to, I was friends with someone who worked for a ski tour company. So every Sunday I'd go up to their little welcome meeting basically and sell my business. And people would generally book me once or twice that week, which kind of just about gave me enough money to survive the season, really.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing that, I found that I absolutely loved it. But I wasn't really ready for life as a ski bum. So I'd also met my wife now and moved back to London. So when I moved back to London, I signed with a little stock library and shot a load of sports for them in London. And it actually coincided with the 2012 Olympics. So I kind of got into that, got great access to shoot all of the Olympics and Paralympics. And from that, just kind of, I sort of worked out that I loved photography, but what I really didn't like about sports photography is the fact that you're so unattached from the moment. It's all about capturing that specific moment that isn't going to repeat, which is still very similar to my work today. But you're always on the sidelines, and you're always at the end of a 400mm lens, and you're always kind of away from the teams of people. That is what I actually realised that was my biggest enjoyment, was the kind of the backstory to it, and also dealing with the people leading up to the work, and sort of basically just enjoy working with and meeting different people. So from there, I was still working a couple of days as a graphic designer, and the rest of the time I used to just shoot whatever I could. So I didn't really assist. I worked in a couple of photography studios every now and then. And yeah, just kind of slowly, it was just a long graft really, to get to where I am today. It was a bit of a mix of kind of a lot of hard work, a few lucky breaks. Bournemouth Uni, where I went, had a really good advertising and marketing department. Course. So a lot of my friends from there had gone into big agencies in London. So that kind of got the ball rolling really.
And where would you say you are now? Why does your work differ obviously now?
So I kind of taken that theme of capturing a moment and sort of run with it really. So you always, as a photographer, get asked, I don't know if you guys get the same, is what would your dream job be? What would your dream client be? And for me, I always really struggle to answer it, because it's not really a motivator. It's more about the process for me. And you could easily be shooting something for a blue chip company or for a charity or an editorial. And as long as the process of getting to that final image is enjoyable, that's kind of what motivates me the most, I guess. So yeah,
I do hate that question. I get asked it probably twice a week, and I'm like, oh God. I just say banks. Just literally, when people speak to me now, and I don't want to kind of engage. Not that's going to sound like really bad, but like, when people say to you, oh, what is it you do? I just go, I'm an accountant. And they go, or when you're at a wedding, right? You remember weddings where we could all get together? I was at a wedding, apologies if the guy who I was being rude to is now listening. But the guy was like, oh, what is it you do? I said, I'm a photographer. He goes, oh yeah, like weddings. And I just went, yeah. Just because I just
and then you told him you were working and slowly slid away.
Yeah, and I was sorry, mate. Go. There's a cake being cut over there. No, but this was the guy, right? Ready? I'm sorry to kind of derail it. This was the guy who, when I turned to him, I said, "Oh, and what do you do?" He goes, "I'm in waste management." And I went, "Oh, that sounds like a rubbish job." And he went, "Yeah, it is." And I was like, "Oh, right, yeah, cool. Well, look, enough of this trash talk." And he went, "Hmm." And I was like, "Okay, right, fine. I think we probably move on the conversation." Anyway,
yeah, he probably gets that about as much as you get. So. What do you do?
What lens is that?
People trying to make stupid rubbish puns.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's a big camera.
That's a big camera.
My brother's got a big camera, bigger than yours.
Yeah.
So back to Jack. Sorry.
So Jack, one of the things then, you kind of started to touch on it there. When you're working on these commercial jobs as you do nowadays, like how do you find the balance between your business and creativity in that kind of commercial sector?
Yeah, sure. I guess so. That's one thing that is quite interesting, because a lot of people I talk to, especially that will kind of either want to get into sort of field of photography or they're already sort of on the journey, expect you're going to spend your life taking photos. And sadly, that's just not the case, is it? As you guys will definitely know, the majority of your time is actually spent doing everything but taking photos. And I think when it comes down to taking the actual image, it must be like a tiny, tiny percentage of the amount of your time that you have spent working up to that. So the weighting of business to creativity, sadly, is fairly heavy. But it's actually something I do quite enjoy, and it's at a point now where some of the jobs I'll still sort of handle bits and pieces of production, but largely we'll end up using production companies and freelance producers. But I do really enjoy working alongside them. But yeah, I think that's one thing that's always really, it seems to be missed a little bit in education in photography, is just how important the business sort of vocational side of it actually is, because you could be the best talent in the country, and if you don't know how to apply yourself and actually get your name out there and work with the right people and meet the right people, then it's kind of irrelevant, really, and unless you just want to be a hobbyist. And it is unfortunate, you do see a lot of people like that who are brilliantly talented but just lack the skill, or lack the kind of a lot of people just lack the motivation to actually adopt the business side of things. But I think it's a real fine balance, because obviously, well, that is a problem. It's also a problem to take the business side of things too seriously, to the point where the creativity is stifled and you just are looking at the numbers and you are just sort of doing it purely for a sort of profiteering point of view. So I think to be successful in commercial photography, it's just about really treading a fine line between the two, and kind of dividing your time adequately, that you get to use all the right parts of your brain that give you the creative buzz, but also keeps the money ticking in and kind of make sure you're on the right path for where you want to be. So yeah, that's kind of, I think
I think it's a step up, I think, from, as you said, like a hobbyist to becoming a professional photographer. The main difference really is the ability to make it pay and make it sustainable. Because to become a professional photographer, i.e. to rely on photography for your income, you can't do that without some business acumen. You just doesn't work.
No.
So what would you say, like, in your kind of journey into photography, have been the kind of biggest lessons that you've learned, and what have you kind of put in place to make sure that your business is sustainable?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the big things that people sort of take for granted is repetition, and just how much you have to do something to be able to get good at it. And for it to sort of become second nature, really. So whatever the task is, but if you've done it enough that you don't have to think about doing it, then it allows you to take everything else to the next level. So yeah, it's just a case really of keep doing something over and over again. But what you really need to make sure is the things that you are repeating, there's basically, I kind of split them into tasks that you want to repeat and tasks that you have to repeat. And there's a huge amount of tasks every single day that you have to just get done to be able to get on to the stuff that you want to repeat. And I don't know, a task that you want to repeat might be grading your images, whereas a task that you have to repeat might be doing your VAT return. So it's just a case of trying to use, we're in a time now where we are hugely fortunate to have amazing technology at our disposal and kind of automation to let those tasks that are a bit more mundane, a bit more business focused, you can kind of farm them out to a computer to a huge extent. So that's something that I spent quite a lot of time doing, is just generating a few sort of workflows that all the mundane bits where it comes to maintaining a database or your bookkeeping or even just replying to emails, just doing it in a way that is the most efficient possible, and where you're able to, leaning on a bit of software. So like, for example, with my bookkeeping, I use some software called FreeAgent, which my bookkeeper actually put me on 2 years ago. And then that's linked with another bit of software called Receipt Bank. So if ever I get a receipt, you take a photo of it on your phone, that goes into your bookkeeping software, that goes to your bookkeeper, and that pulls out all the numbers. So you don't ever have this moment that a lot of people still have, where you're sitting sifting through a bag of receipts and it might take you half a day just to do your accounting of your receipts. And I mean, who wants to be sitting there doing that?
Yeah, we talked about Receipt Bank actually last week, I believe,
Right.
because something I use in conjunction with my accounting software. What other kind of things have you set up? I mean, these kind of examples are really interesting, I think, for our listeners. I certainly know that we've been getting kind of good comments when people have been discussing practical solutions.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's solutions to all aspects of the business, really, aren't there? From the financial point of view, which you guys have sort of touched on, so we won't go too much more into that. But also, from a more creative point of view, Capture One has a huge amount of capabilities for automating different things. And whether that comes from, like, for example, I have my own session set up. So a click of a button, you've got your own session, which will have the correct amount of shots in it. The renaming structures will all be preset. And so right from the capture of an image through to backing up an image using Chronosync, which a lot of people use. But again, it's a brilliant bit of software just to kind of automate the backup process. And then to getting back in the office when you're actually looking to archive those images, and the huge sort of issue of data safety. So for ages, I spent a long time trying to work out a really efficient way of archiving my images. And now the current year that I'm working on gets backed up to a server in the office. And then overnight that gets backed up to, I use Backblaze online. And then every year I will set that to archive the next year, and the year that it has been archiving, I'll put on a disk and keep that at home. So for all my data now, I've got one in the cloud, one in the office, and one at home. And again, that's just a process. It's just a kind of a learning thing, really. I used to say, oh yeah, once a week I'll back up my data onto another drive and I'll take it home. And you know what it's like. You might not be in the office that week, or you might have to rush out Friday afternoon, and it just didn't happen. So now using that Backblaze, it just does it for me. So it's just another task that I don't have to even think about. And that kind of weekly backup is just running in the background. So it's just something that you can check every couple of months rather than do once a week.
Do you keep most of your raw images that you're shooting on jobs? I mean,
I do, yeah. I keep everything. I think I tend to. My average is around 100 gig a day, so I'm not shooting huge amounts of stills. And then video content, which is probably 50-50 stills and video at the moment. I just use little Seagate external drives for that because it just smashes through data. I just find the quickest, easiest way of doing that is I'll generally have 3 drives. One will go to the client, one will stay in the office, and one will stay at home. And then that'll just be, each project will be on one of those drives. And they're so cheap now. It seems the quickest and easiest way to get that.
What are those ruggeds now? What, 75 quid?
Yeah.
They're hardly anything.
No, exactly. And by the time you're paying for actual server storage, it just yeah.
I do find it somewhat depressing when I've been doing some work at home renovating, and I had to clear out under the stairs, and I have boxes of old hard drives in there that have just become redundant, and they're full of images which are backed up elsewhere. But it's this idea that more electronic waste for landfill. It's just quite depressing.
Oh yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
How much we generate, even digital compared to like film, because you think about how many negatives people would have produced back in the day. It's nowhere near how much we're producing now electronically.
Oh no, definitely not.
But I guess it's one of the aspects of the job, I guess, as well. Yeah,
that's it. And I think whatever industry you're in, it's really hard to kind of actually have a bit of perspective and not beat up on yourself too much, because everyone's becoming more and more conscious of kind of issues like that. And yeah, I think compared to other industries, we do have a relatively small footprint, and people are pretty conscious of those sort of environmental issues.
Mm-hmm. I'm always looking for ways, though, that kind of stuff can. I'm sure at some point, and there must be systems out there for recycling some of this stuff in terms of finding another use for it in another place, and whether or not that's shipping out to somewhere where it can still be useful or not. Because ultimately, as photographers, we're always after the fastest hard drive. We're always after the fastest connection, the latest connection. So suddenly my Firewire 800 hard drive is not much use anymore.
No, it does all have a relatively short life, I guess, doesn't it? But yeah, there must be some sort of electronic recycling program, I'm sure.
We'll put that out to our listeners and see if anyone comes back with any suggestions.
Yeah.
So when you are kind of doing this, you're talking about it with your backup and you're dividing between your office and your home. Have you got anything further to talk about with regards to like dividing your days in the office itself when you're working between creativity and admin? Because the thing with obviously maintaining a business and keeping it afloat is always finding that balance. Some people like to have a really strict kind of timetable. I know, Tom, you use that method.
Pomodoro technique.
Yeah, which I realized I sometimes used without knowing what it was called. But effectively, ways to manage your time, because we all know that it's quite easy, especially when you're online. You suddenly get pulled off in a tangent and you find yourself researching something, and then 40 minutes later you realized you've just spent 40 minutes staring at a light modifier or something.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And hopefully I am actually practicing what I'm going to preach here, but I'm just as guilty as everyone else of having those moments where you do find yourself down a rabbit hole looking at some random bit of kit, or who knows, at the moment I'm looking into potentially buying a new van to use for work, and that is a brilliant use of time to look at different versions for VW transporters. Is going to be the nail in the coffin of my productivity, I think. But no, so what I do really try and do is divide up the tasks between your admin and creativity. And it could be in a day you've got to reply to a load of emails, create a treatment, come up with some concepts for a new test project, and trying to keep your brain on one track nowadays is just impossible. And all the time you've got WhatsApp on your computer dinging, and you've got someone trying to get hold of you on the phone, and it's just concentration, I think, nowadays is a real commodity. And it is just impossible a lot of the time to actually get into a zone where you really are focused on that one task. So I think the one way that I try and do that is by separating out the admin and the creativity sort of tasks. So you could easily spend a bit of time doing a treatment and then every now and then reply to an email, and it'll generally take you longer and you'll put in less concentration to the treatment. So what I would tend to do is I use a to-do list on my phone. It used to be called Wunderlist, and I think it's just been bought by Microsoft, and I think it's just called Microsoft To Do now. And that's the easiest thing I found it's on my computer, it's on my phone. I also share it with my wife, so if we've got household stuff that needs to get done, she can just ping something on her phone and it will come on mine. And that's really valuable for I'll be walking home from the office and I'll think of something that I need to do tomorrow, and I'll just stick it on there and it's out of your head. So what I'll do when I first get into the office in the morning is I will go through that list and I'll pull out all of the little admin jobs that I need to do and think about all of the actual bigger tasks that are going to demand a bit of brain power. And I'll separate it out. So I try and break it into chunks. So you'll have half an hour doing all the admin bits, and then anywhere up to 3 hours, purely single sort of focus, working on those bigger picture tasks that are either going to land you a new job, or they're going to give you a really nice new bit of personal work, or it might be an overhaul of your website, or it could just be spending 2 hours doing some research into a new kind of look and feel, or just things that you can actually enjoy getting lost in for a little bit, without the distractions of the sort of non-essential tasks popping up all the time. So when I'm doing that, I'll generally turn my email off and put my phone on silent and stick a bit of music on. I can't really work to anything with words, so I think sort of Bonobo and stuff like that tends to be my go-to. I'll just stick it on and just try and really get into the zone. And then you can come out of that feeling like you've actually achieved something, because there's nothing worse than going into the office for the day and you sort of, you've been working for 8-10 hours, but you don't actually really know what you've done. But if
those
you
are the worst.
Yeah. And that's the benefit of working for yourself, right? You control your own time, so you don't want to waste your own time. I'd rather be faffing around at home or spending time with the family than just in my office looking at social media or any other random bits and pieces online. So I think that gives that real sort of sense of satisfaction at the end of the day when you're like, and also it's a real sense of satisfaction if you've got like 10 little admin jobs. If you do those throughout the day, it just feels like a chore. But if you can be like, bang, I smashed all the stuff that I didn't really want to be doing in half an hour, the day's yours,
No, amazing.
Do you tend to outsource? Do you much of your work in terms of, do you have areas of your business that you outsource?
Absolutely. My kind of thinking with that is I'll outsource anything that I don't want to do, anything that someone can do better than me, and anything that is just going to sort of drag me down.
Yeah.
So bookkeeping is a prime example of that. I spent years doing my own bookkeeping, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm saving loads of money doing my bookkeeping myself. I know exactly what's going on with all my figures. And then a friend of mine was like, you need to forget about accountancy and get a bookkeeper, and then the bookkeeper will be your kind of go-to person instead of doing all the stuff yourself and all your bookkeeping, and then at the end of the year you deal with an accountant. He was saying accountants like dealing with bookkeepers, so if you can avoid ever having to talk to an accountant, then everything will be a lot more seamless. And I was like,
yeah,
okay, well, I've never really had any experience with bookkeepers, so what I'm going to do is, for my first tax return, at that point I wasn't a limited company, I was just a sole trader, I wasn't set up for VAT, so everything was still relatively straightforward. So I just thought, what I'll do, I'm going to give the tax return to this bookkeeper, and as a test, I'll do the tax return myself as well, and just see what happens. And I remember so clearly now, that tax return, his version was £2,000 cheaper than mine. And I'd done no work. And I was like, that is an absolute no-brainer. He's saving me money, and I'm not doing a job that I don't want to do. Why would I ever do my own tax return again?
Yeah. 100%.
So where did you find your bookkeeper? Did you kind of go to Bookkeepers R Us?
No, I did actually try looking at all that sort of things, and it was just a recommendation from another photographer, someone they used that was good. And the thing that I really liked about that was they used this free agent software, because before then everything was in Excel sheets, and I didn't want to be doing it, let alone maintaining it. So using some actual bookkeeping software meant they maintained the software, and also I could see live throughout the year roughly what my tax return was going to be. So you can plan for it, your cash flow's a lot more easy, and you don't get to a point where at the end of the year you're like, oh, I've got a massive tax bill. You just kind of throughout the year you can see it trickling in and it going up, and it's just another thing that you haven't got to think about. So bookkeeping is one that I definitely don't get involved in. I think now I think they charge me something like £100 a month, and they do my VAT return, my tax return, and my payroll, because I'm a limited company, so it's only me on the payroll, but someone's got to do the payroll still, And again, that's something that I would have no interest in doing. So it's great to just not have to think about it. They ping me an email when they need something, and even their invoices are set up automatically to be paid, so I don't even have to worry about paying them. I just get an invoice come through, I can check it, and then it'll go out on a direct debit. So it's just all of those little things that chew into your day. So that's one. A website is another thing. Obviously, it's your kind of main shop window as a photographer, so as your business, it is probably more important than anything, I guess. People being able to quickly look at your work and get a good impression for your style. And I think having a highly functional, fast website is absolutely essential. So again, it's something that I don't really know anything about. I'm not a web designer. Why would I do that? It reminds me of something someone said to me ages ago, was if I've got to try and get it right now. You wouldn't just design your own house. You would go to an architect to design the house for you, because they have expertise in designing a house, and people would just take that for granted, Whereas
Greg,
when it comes to loads of other
Greg, how do you feel about that?
Sorry, a bit of context here, Jack. I've probably done scale drawings for my current work by hand about 6 or 7 times now for the builders. I was just this morning chatting to them as they were putting up stud walls, going, no, it's not going to go there, it's going to go there, look at the drawing. So yeah, learned that the hard way. Carry on.
Sorry.
But maybe that wasn't the best example, but you get this kind of school of thought. Basically, if you're not good at something and someone else is better, then
100%, yeah,
you can
either spend the time kind of learning it but being frustrated. I mean, I had this recently with a project that I did, moving image project. I can edit stuff. I'm happy with editing in certain software, but do I really want to spend hours and hours kind of being demoralized by trying to learn new software, or would I rather just pay someone to kind of do that and do it much better? And I had a colleague here in the studio who did their own edit and was looking over my shoulder the other day at a project that I'd shot and got someone else to edit, and kind of I saw them visibly shrink a little bit.
Yeah.
And about 2 hours later, I get a message off him saying, what was the name of that editor you used? And it was that realization that you can spend the time kind of working on something yourself, and it is probably time when you've not got much else, it is worth doing, because at least you get to understand the process. But there is a fine balance between doing that and not creating something as good as it could be if you got someone to do it who's better than you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Go on, Tom. You can kind of use photography as an analogy, right? If someone has a product they want to launch, they might have created a really great product, and they will get a photographer to come and create some great images. Or they could just have a crack at taking their own photos. And they might be able to get some photos, but you'll look at their website and you'll be like, oh, those, the color balance doesn't quite match on all the files. So it's always best, I think, just to get an expert if you want a proper job done. And we would all be gutted if everyone was like, no, you don't need photographers. We've all got cameras now. So whatever field you're dealing with, where possible, get an expert.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I actually, for years, did my own website to a very high standard. It was a very good website. And then when I got in touch with my current web guy, he was like, actually, your website's fine, but it's slow. And even when you can do things to a certain level, there are going to be better people. There are going to be people who can make it more efficient. So I actually got my guy in, and he managed to get my page loading time from 12 seconds down to 1.2. And actually that makes a huge difference in the amount of people who...
That's the difference between someone looking at your work and not, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, because if you've done your own website, or you're using this format or Squarespace or things, and you haven't maybe properly optimized your images or something like that, and you can do these speed tests on your website. Pingdom do one, and GT Metrics have another one if you want to kind of see how fast your website loads all over the world. And then actually, the rule of thumb is that any longer than 3 seconds and people will get bored and leave. So your website needs to be loading faster than 3 seconds. And chances are, you probably need to speak to a web guy about that, because, it's a bit of like witchcraft and black magic, really, as far as kind of like image optimization and stuff like that goes. But yeah, just speak to people who can do a better job.
So I kind of want to briefly dive back in, Jack, to you were talking about kind of workflows. beforehand, and we were talking about kind of the stuff that you have in the office. How does it work for your workflows on set? Do you try and keep them simplified, or what's your kind of process when you're shooting on a commercial job?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, workflows in the office are one thing, right? Because if you have a workflow and your day in the office is efficient, then that's great for you and you can make good progress. And if for some days you don't have great workflows, or you just sack off your workflows, there's not a huge consequence when you work for yourself. But when you're on a commercial job and you're booked on a 10-hour day and you've got 30 people looking over your shoulder, as soon as you don't have an efficient workflow and things start to lag behind, you either don't get the images you need to get, or you start running into overtime, and then you get a lot of serious questions about why things took that long. So more than office time, on set, you have to be the most efficient version of yourself possible, because as the photographer, you are the CEO, the manager, you are the person that anyone turns to with any questions. And whether you're taking stills or directing video, the buck stops at you, really. And everyone will have their own separate jobs, whether it's lighting or catering or hair and makeup. And they're the best version, hopefully, if you hire the right people, they're the best version that you can get. But at the end of the day, the actual, what generally dictates the flow of the day, the energy of the day, and how things progress during the shoot is the photographer. And I think, again, it comes down to repetition. You have to have your workflows in place, and they'll be different for each photographer. I can't reel off how I work and that'll work for everybody else. You have to do what you do enough times that you work out where you can catch up time and where things are going to slow you down. And then you just account for that, So I have in my head now a very rough, it doesn't matter what we're shooting, I'll have a rough timing plan in my head, even whether there's a producer that's kind of putting a schedule together as well. I'll kind of just know that, right, at that location, realistically, by the time everyone's loaded in all the kit and they've grabbed it at breakfast and you've had a chat to the client and you've done this and you've done that, we're not going to be even thinking about starting shooting until 11 o'clock. And if you were shooting a personal project, for example, there's a lot less pressure, there's a lot less hoops to jump through, there's a lot less stress. You might turn up at a location at 9 and by 10 o'clock you're getting shots that you're really happy with. So that was one of the biggest learnings for me, is just patience. And it's kind of those checks and balances, because when it is a big commercial job, if something goes a bit awry, it does have big implications. So it's just consistency of, I'll do this, then I'll do that, and then once that's ready, then we'll move on to that, and then we'll check that with them. And you just repeat that workflow with each job. And there's nothing better than doing something regularly and doing it a lot to be able to, the workflows kind of fall into place themselves eventually, because you can try forcing it and you can try saying like, right, we're going to have this exact schedule, and unless you've been through it a few times, you don't realize what does and what doesn't work. So just shooting really regularly, I would say, is the best thing for developing workflows. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be constantly commissioned for loads and loads of work. It just means that maybe you do more test shoots, or maybe you kind of, after having a shoot that didn't go particularly well, you sit down and you really have a word of yourself and you analyze, like, why did I do that then? And if I'd actually just waited, then maybe we could have not made that error and we could have got onto that a little bit quicker. Or maybe if we prepped that, or I'd got another assistant who could have been prepping that lighting, then by the time I was ready to move on, I wouldn't have had to move that light myself. And it's just, it just does come down to practice, really.
I think the more that you have set up in your head because you're familiar with it, and the fact that it's stuff that you have repeated and you're so familiar with it that you can do your eyes shut, the more you can actually focus on the job as well and actually thinking creatively. Because if you're not working efficiently, and you are worrying, say, for example, you're working with assistants that you've not worked with before or that frequently, so you're having to kind of babysit or because they don't know your kit or whatever, then all of that detracts from your ability to focus your creative brain on the job at hand, because you're having to kind of straddle the practical, straddle dealing with the client, straddle kind of overseeing what assistants are doing. So it becomes very difficult to kind of then be, flexible enough to actually be bringing something new to the table that the client has hired you for.
Yeah. And I think it's a good point about using crew, particularly that you know and are experienced with, because I've got this brilliant sort of rapport with my team now, and they just know my workflows and they know my kit inside out, so they know all the kit that I own and they know where it goes in each bag, which is just, it sounds like a really simple thing, but when you've got 3 bags and each bag has got 40 things in it, to be able to just not have to explain to someone as, oh yeah, the battery for that head is in that pack, or like, oh yeah, you need a first aid kit, yeah, it's in there. It's just seamless. It comes down to what we were saying earlier about hiring experts, and experts exist at every level, and there are a huge amount of experts that we're lucky to work with every time we're on set. So whether that comes down to assistants or producers or whoever, really, it's just about leaning on those people to help you, and that is a bigger workflow as any, is relying on the team around you and not trying to be this island where you do everything on set, because I've had jobs where, I don't know, maybe the budget was low, or for some reason you might have been abroad and you couldn't have the crew that you normally have, and all of a sudden, while you're trying to, I don't know, make sure there's a bin for the catering to go in, and at the same time get the lighting set up, and you're trying to talk to the client at the same time, and you can't be all things to all people all the time. So that's one of the real sort of bits of advice I would say, is just be confident in the team that you're employing, you're working with, that they know you exactly as you want to be known, So if that means that you have to pay an assistant for a day just to go into a studio and talk them through your kit and test some stuff, then you're probably going to come out with some images at the end of the day that will be useful. And that when you get onto that next big job, that you're not going to have to talk them through what they're doing. So, yeah, I think the other thing that is crucial is to understand that there will be problems. I can't think of any job where there hasn't been a problem. And whether that comes from, I don't know, someone trips over and hurt themselves, or I had a job last week where someone picked up a barbell that we're using as a prop and knocked one of the speakers in the studio off the wall, and it smashed on the floor. And it's just being able to cope in a crisis, I think, is really, really valuable when you're on set. And that is, again, a pretty big workflow, is just being able to understand, not if something is going to go wrong, but just knowing in your head something will go wrong. How are you going to deal with it? And there's a kind of a fine line, again, you've got to tread between how much you inform the agency and the client to keep them on side, but also how much you deal with those problems that doesn't scare people and doesn't panic people. I thinking back to a job that we did at the tail end of last year, that was it was one of those jobs you're going into and it's going to be stressful. There were about 8 dogs on set, and we were shooting in someone's garden in the middle of nowhere in a small shed, basically. So you just know, I'm not in central London. There's not access to kit. We were shooting in November, so the time was, I don't know, we're shooting realistically from like 11 till 3 or something, if we were relying on daylight. So I was like, right, going into this, what's going to go wrong? Power is going to be a problem. Lighting is going to be a problem. And then getting anything to us quickly is probably going to be an issue. So how do we mitigate that? So they'd been using the location for a TV setup the day before, and the whole day TV had been tripping their power. So I'd already planned to have our own generator on site, which really does get you out of a lot of trouble. I tend to use constant light and continuous light. So mainly because I shoot a lot of stills and video alongside each other nowadays, and I do a lot of work with children who just kind of tend to be a bit less distracted by continuous light. So power is one of the big stresses for me. So again, that's a workflow that I've really had to develop, is finding a cost-effective, efficient way of powering all my lighting. So we use a little Land Rover with a generator on the back. So I had that coming to set. So I was like, right, okay, hopefully that's not going to be a problem. And on the day, what actually was a problem is we had an 18K that was lighting up the whole side of this shed. And basically, we got there in the morning, and the first thing we realised is the 18K won't spark. So that's basically my sun. And without that, it very much looks like we're in a damp, dingy shed rather than a nice, bright location. So if that had been me a couple of years ago, you would have been like, what's going on? How did I do this? I can't shoot. But you've been through those problems enough that you realise we'll find a way around it. So luckily you got a pretty good sort of rapport with the lighting hire company, and spoke to them, and straight away they're like, okay, we'll get one out to you straight away. So in the meantime, we just managed to rejig the schedule and get on shooting some more detail type bits that didn't require like big, wide shots. So we could get away with using some of the other lighting that I'd kind of added on just in case to the lighting list. So anyway, it gets to 11 o'clock and our light turns up. So everyone's like, yeah, brilliant. By this point, we had actually kind of informed the agency and the client, because they were asking questions, obviously, as why the schedule is completely different to what we were supposed to be shooting. And the light turns up, bring it round out the van, and this lamp literally looked like someone had dropped it out of a first floor window. An 18K is probably, I don't know, it's easily kind of on the floor. It's like chest high, and they weigh probably the best part of 100 kilos. It's not a small light. And it literally looked like someone had just kicked it off the back of the van. And so this was kind of was supposed to be our sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. This turned up, all our problems were solved. But what actually happened was you get all the clients and agency really excited that they can now crack on with their day, and I have to break the news to them that now we don't have another light still, and they've got to go back. And so basically we didn't actually get our key light until 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
So
did you use that lighting company again?
Not since.
What was the reasoning for the second light not being
dropped out of a first story window?
Still under sort of, it was one of those things. There was never a clear explanation of who was at fault.
Wow.
They were very good to me, and they did comp the entire hire, which is probably the least they could do, considering what the overtime charges would have been if we'd actually had to go into overtime. Luckily, I think we ended up with 1 hour of overtime, and a client that was very happy with the images. And if you can deal with a crisis like that, you come out of it, rather than being the person that freaked out and then there were problems, you come out of it as the guy that, remember that we had that shoot and there was all these problems, but we didn't actually end up paying any overtime, and we didn't pay for our lighting hire, and the clients still love all the images, and they didn't really see it as a problem, because they don't know what an 18K is. They don't know why I needed one. They don't care, as long as they get their images. And as long as you've got a plan B that you can kind of just fall into without a huge amount of faff. No one other than you really knows, and especially no one other than you really cares. So just basically have a plan B and potentially a plan C up your sleeve is another sort of workflow tip, that whatever you have planned, it won't go as you've planned it. There will be some kind of catastrophic error that will generally be out of your control. Sometimes it isn't out of your control. Sometimes it's genuinely a mistake you've made. But it doesn't really matter who's at fault on set when the clock's ticking and the budget's going up. You just need quick answers and quick fixes. I think talking more about workflows, I think when you are back in the office, it's always tempting to be like, right, I'm going to be really efficient. I'm going to come up with all these workflows that are going to save me all this time. And if I do this, then I won't ever have to talk to my bookkeeper again, or I won't have to do all these things that kind of, you have the best intentions and you start off with these ideas of efficiency, but it's very easy to kind of tie yourself up in knots and go down this rabbit hole with sort of productivity. And it's a case of being a bit honest with yourself of, is what I'm doing actually going to save me time long term? Is the problem I'm trying to fix big enough that I need to spend a whole day working a workflow around it? Or, you know what, I don't like that task, but I'm just going to crack on with it at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning and get it out of the way. Or you could spend half of that week being like, oh, I've got the perfect workflow, I'm never going to have to do this again. So it's kind of weighing it up. Is it something you can actually save time on, or is it something that you just don't want to do? But truth be told, if you just do it quickly, it'll be behind you.
Are there elements that you, apart from your bookkeeper, which was a good example, are there other elements that you've kind of changes you've made to your business that you felt have really helped develop efficiency in your workflows? Is there software that you use that you swear by, or kind of systems that you have in place now that you perhaps didn't have in place that you've gone, I'm really glad I brought that in?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things really that have really sort of, A, they kind of elevate how you come across to a client, and B, they make your day more enjoyable and just make your life easier. One of the things I've done is move all of my filing for sort of business side of things and treatments and all over to Google. So whether that is my emails are all through Google, my file structure is all through Google. So I've got multiple computers. So when you're trying to keep an iPad and say 3 computers all up to date, having a central filing system is really key. That I know that if I create a treatment in the office, when I go home and somebody all of a sudden wants it at 9 o'clock at night, I haven't got to go back to the office. I can just look on my laptop or on my iPad, access the same files and ping it off to them. That's really valuable. I also use that a lot for collaborating with agencies and clients, whether that's reviewing retouch or I've got a document in my Google Slides that basically I'll retouch an image, I'll chuck it into Google Slides. They can then comment on what they do and don't like, and then I'll make those changes. I'll upload the image again to the next slide. So then when you go back at the end of the retouch, you may have, I don't know, like 5 versions of one image, and you can see the changes all the way through. So that's complete parity between you and the agency of exactly what changes have been made. They can kind of tell that you're not ripping them off from a time point of view. And it really does make life pretty simple. So that's quite a good little one. I'm super anal with my renaming of files. I won't ever send anyone files until I've got a complete rename of those files that I'm happy with. And I do it by date, and then agency, and then client, and then job, and then 4-digit counter. And I'll do that at the end of the day before I send any low-res JPEGs or anything to the client. I'll do that because I've had it before where, say a Digi has renamed some files in the way they normally rename their files, and then you have pinged across a few files to an agency. Then you get home and you're like, oh, right, now I'm going to rename my files once I've sorted all the folder structure and everything out. And then all of a sudden, the client wants you to review an image and it's a completely different file name. And that can be an absolute nightmare.
What do you use to do that? Because I think we discussed this last week, Tom, didn't we? Kind of renaming software that you'd used or in the past renaming.
I rename on ingestion. So when I tether into Capture One, I have it basically set up with my naming workflow to just I have the kind of the way I do it straight away, so the files never change from the moment of ingestion. But I know obviously a lot of people have multiple.
But this is a brilliant example of why one workflow will work for a photographer, but not someone else, and why you have to spend time really honing your own workflow. Is on a lot of shoots, I'll mix between being tethered and not being tethered, and you might have 2 or 3 cameras on the go, and if all of a sudden you just got to throw a card into the computer and have a look at those files, when Capture brings in stuff that's not tethered, it doesn't automatically rename it.
No.
So again, you can come to the end of the day and half of your files will have your perfect workflow rename structure, and then the other half will be like DS19834. So what I do generally is everything goes into a shot folder, whether it's tethered or not, and then the files are all renamed by. So my Capture One folder, for example, for today would be 2010-08-06, and then it'll be exposed negative, and then it'll be -1234. And Capture also pulls out the shot folder from that as well. So it will be renamed by the name of the Capture session, and then it'll pull in the shot folder, and that'll be renamed for, I don't know, boy playing on beach or whatever it might be. And then after that, it will have the actual number structure. And that's all done when we finish each shot. It'll just be a quick rename of all the files onto the next shot.
Do you use particular software for that, or do you do that through Capture?
That's all built into Capture One.
Yeah, because Capture, you can use the recipe. What are they called? I can't even remember. I use them all the time. You just basically set parameters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's just a shortcut. So you just batch rename your files, and it will have the recipe that you've created. And yeah, mine is just
so for the files that you're bringing in that aren't tethered, because I mean I have a similar situation, and last week we were discussing kind of various workflows, and I was talking to Tom about how quite often when I'm on NGO jobs, I'll use Photomechanic.
Yeah.
And through previous kind of painful experiences of using Photomechanic and then sometimes it duplicating ingest,
right?
Because it's trying to rename and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there was a particular software, I can't remember what it was. I can't remember if we discussed it. That was external. I'd not heard of it before, but some people actually use this software purely for renaming files en masse.
Right.
Obviously, I know that in Finder you can do it. Yeah, Bridge is good for that.
I just find that there's lots of options, right? But the more options you have, the more options there are for mistakes. And I just find that if the file comes in and once we're done with that shot and we're ready to move on, we rename those inside of Capture, then boom, that is your file name locked in. It's never going to change.
Yeah, it's the most efficient way of doing it.
If you don't use Capture, there is a bit of software called a Better Finder Renamer, which basically you can batch rename files, but also you can specify how the files are sorted. So it can be done by date created, and it can be done by, all sorts of different kind of parameters in that. But yeah, like I say, I use Capture, so I do it that way, same as you.
Yeah.
So aside from the renaming, and are there any others that you've kind of brought in that have saved you a lot of pain?
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of the actual data wrangling side of things, and then there's the actual creativity behind outputting your images, right? And that is equally something that can chew up a huge amount of time. It's okay if you're shooting one image for a billboard, that one image can take a huge amount of focus, and it might have like 10 reviews and retouch, and it's quite easy to actually keep track of that. But when I tend to shoot more image library quantities than individual images, so you might be delivering 100 images from one day, right? And they've got to have the same look and feel across the entire set. So I have spent quite a long time in Capture developing my grade and the way that I like to process those files. And Capture is so powerful now that 90% of the work will be done in there without having to resort to Photoshop. And that just means once you've got a grade that you're actually happy with, you can kind of hone it on one file, and then as long as hopefully all your exposures are relatively the same across the board, you use similar cameras, it's quite easy just to copy those grades across multiple files. So yeah, where possible, I will try and keep everything in Capture as long as possible. And then once I've got a grade I'm happy with and it's been signed off by the client, any other remedial work, if I'm retouching the files, sometimes I won't be, but if I'm retouching the files, I'll then export PSDs out of Capture. And that actually keeps the files in Capture as well, which is great. It used to be a bit clunky linking them all up and things, but some updates now mean that I'll actually have the final folder of select images will be PSDs that I'm working on, and I'll work on them out of Capture in Photoshop and then pull them back into Capture for your final exports. Say you're exporting whatever format are required. And again, that's something that could take forever, but I've got recipes set up in Capture that will output stuff for my website, stuff that's high-res TIFFs, some things that are for my agent's website. And again, it's a click of a button and you output 100 files rather than individually doing that. So that saves a huge amount of time. And yeah, in terms of delivery, once that's done, I use WeTransfer. I've got a pro account with WeTransfer. If anyone from WeTransfer is listening and you're up for a little plug, then I do think it is a really valuable bit of photography software. Whereas any creative, really, just the amount of data we're wrangling now to be able to have unlimited uploads for such a small amount of money is brilliant.
Quickly, if anyone from WeTransfer would like to donate money to sponsor the podcast, we all use WeTransfer here.
Yeah, I'll have a free account as well, please.
Oh yeah, while you're at it.
But yeah, no, I think that's a great little thing. I used to host web galleries online where the client would get their own link and they'd get a login, and a bit kind of like I guess people would review like wedding photos and stuff like that, it feels. And it just was a little bit clunky when you've got 10 people that need to sign off and a set of images, and they might be across multiple companies from agents to clients. A WeTransfer link does seem to be the most efficient bit of software that everyone can access. There's only certain companies I've dealt with that their servers seem to block it, but normally it's pretty across the board.
Or people are used to getting it as well. Is it, the amount of time to be like, just WeTransfer it.
Yeah, people know what they're doing. So that's really useful. And yeah, I mean, that kind of covers from start to finish. What I didn't really touch on as well is, while it's great to have people that know your kit inside out and your workflows inside out, that isn't always the case. It might be that your preferred digi is booked on another job, or again, you might be abroad. So I've got a little document that I created that is just a real quick summary of my DigiCapture workflow. So I can just send that to someone that's going to be working for me, and before they get to the shoot, they can have a quick, it's just literally one page of, this is how I rename my files. This is where you'll find my session recipes. Just so, again, I haven't got to be on set being like, click that, rename that to there. And I just know that all the files are going to be renamed exactly as I want them. When I get back in the office, I'm not going to have to effectively do their job, because you're hiring someone good, right? And you just need to tell them your little intricacies of your workflows and then let them crack on.
Yeah, 100%. And saves so much time, hassle, takes something else off your shoulders. Ideal.
Yeah.
What we haven't really talked about, well, we talked a lot about workflow. What we should probably talk about is how much time all these workflows and all these kind of ways of doing things, they all save us huge amounts of time. So hopefully we can go back to being a bit more creative. So it's, do you find, obviously, with all the time saved, you've got more spare time to kind of, plan the next personal project or kind of get out and do something a bit more creative?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say that, oh, look, I don't do my own bookkeeping now, so I put that time every week into creating a new personal project or whatever. But in reality, it just means that when you're not going through all those stresses in the office, you're actually more relaxed and more in the right mindset when you are doing the things that you care about, Mm-hmm. So you might not necessarily, and you probably don't end up with more time, because we all find ways to fill our time, right? But it just means that you're not in a miserable frame of mind where you really want to be working on your new portfolio edit, but
Mm-hmm.
you've got to spend 6 hours doing your bookkeeping. Well, I keep using bookkeeping as a...
I get the feeling it was a bit of a...
everyone hates it.
But you're sponsored by Free Agent.
There's plenty of other little jobs that you have to do day in, day out, whether it's from Hoover in the office or just all the little things that you're running a business, right? Although you're a photographer, it doesn't matter whether you're a photographer or you're an architect or you run a marketing company. Like, all of these jobs have to get done. And yeah, if you can find a way that you spend more time doing all the stuff that you enjoy doing than the stuff that clogs up your brain,
mm-hmm.
then you're just going to be happier doing the stuff that you want to do. And it doesn't really matter what that is. It could be spending time with your family. It could mean that you don't work Friday afternoons, It all depends, again, on, like, workflows have to be adaptable to people. So does what do you spend the time that you've hopefully saved on.
Mm-hmm.
100%. Well, I mean, that seems like a good place to kind of draw things to a close. But before we go, we tend to... every week we ask our guests about their Desert Island photo book and their Desert Island camera. So what would be your kind of Desert Island photo book, or if you want to start with your camera?
Let's start with photo books. Like I was saying earlier, I never had the traditional sort of photography education. So I'm a little bit naive when it comes to the history of photography and all of the amazing photographers. And while I'm kind of slowly trying to get my head around all of the people that I should know more about than I do, I would love to. I think street photography is something that really interests me, just because although I'm kind of pigeonholed in the lifestyle sector, I don't really love the term lifestyle. I prefer just the idea of capturing these sort of intimate moments. And I think street photography really sums that up the best out of any field of photography. So I was actually put onto a photographer called Tom Wood, who was introduced to me by a good friend. A little shout out to Tom Farmer if he's listening. And yeah, Tom Wood, basically, he's an old school street photographer who was from Liverpool, and he has got a book called Women's Market.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, he spent about 13 years documenting a market in Liverpool. And it's a real interesting social study of just a kind of, the 80s and sort of really early 90s fashion is just amazing. And some of the kind of hairdos of these women. And just, I think it's a bit of nostalgia for me, because all of the kids in the photos are in a similar kind of clothes as when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, it does remind me of a lot of my family photos, just the sort of styling and the kind of look and feel. It was all just mainly shot on SLR with a range of kind of cheap color or black and white film, whatever he could get his hands on, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other reason that I really like it is it comes back to what we were saying about repetition. And you could go to a market and shoot for, I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever, and you would end up probably with a nice little body of work. But the fact that he felt like he had to do it for 13 years, it's like a real deeper understanding of finding that image that I think is kind of, there's obviously still people doing it today, but it is a bit of a dying art. People just don't have the time or the resources to pursue those kind of real long-term projects. And I think I don't think he would ever really associate himself as a professional photographer. He was just known as a guy that took photos, and that was just a pure love of his. So yeah, that's a really nice book that I like having a flick through. And in terms of cameras, I've got I shoot a lot of. When my daughter Esther was born about 3 years ago, I bought a little Fuji X100 that I use day in, day out around the house and every now and then on jobs, as my kind of get away from the lugging your SLR stuff around thing, and just to kind of change it up so it feels like my family photos are a bit different to my professional work, and that has actually created a body of work which is one of the most viewed albums on my website now. So it kind of goes to show that mixing things up can actually lead to positives, and that has given me a kind of a real steer on how I approach commercial work now, just looking at some of the stuff that's come out of that camera. But I don't know if that actually would be. I've got, just purely because of the charm of it, I've got a little a Canon AE1 program film camera, and that literally just lives on a shelf in my house, and it sits next to the Fuji, and the Fuji, I'll pick it up multiple times throughout the week and just take little photos of whatever's going on. But if there's something that's really, really special, it's just every now and then you just get a bit of beautiful light streak come through the window in the kitchen, or just kind of, if I know, like for example, the last time I saw my uncle before he passed away, just the real kind of key moments like that, I'll just take that camera, and I'll only ever process the film probably once every 6 months. I'll just shoot a roll of 35mm. Nothing special. It's normally just got either some cheap Fujifilm or maybe a roll of portrait if I'm really splashing out. And it's just that real buzz of such a kind of look back at that year. If you've only got a couple of rolls of film out of the whole year, it really... it really is exciting actually getting that film back.
I think this is the thing with shooting film in general, isn't it? Is that sense of, with digital, there's just so much choice that you maybe stop valuing the images as much. When you've got less, you appreciate what you've got. So if you've only got 36 shots or you've got 12 shots on your 120, you're going to look differently at the 2 frames that you might have taken of somebody rather than the 30 that you could have shot off on your digital camera.
And it's also,
so it's the AE1 then for you, is it?
It's the AE1 program, and I got really lucky actually when I bought it, because they all come with a little plastic 1.8 50mm, and it's only 150 quid or something for the camera and the lens. But I just kind of thought, how do I make this, if this is going to be my sort of little special camera, how do I make it a bit more different? And I had a look online, and I managed to get one of the breech mount FD 50mm 1.4s. I actually got it on Oxfam online. So that's a good little shout actually. If you are looking into buying older cameras, Oxfam online is a really good place to have a check every now and then, because you're benefiting a good cause, and they do have some little gems on there every now and then.
Wow, I didn't even realise that Oxfam had a kind of...
neither did I.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I was just Googling the lens that I knew I wanted, and that was just one of the Google image results. So, yeah, really chuffed with that.
Excellent. Well, we'll link to the Oxfam webpage in the show notes. If people want to find out more about you, Jack, where can they go? What can they look at for what's your social handles, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So if you just Google Jack Terry, either .co.uk or .com will both come to me. And then my Instagram and Twitter are both at Jack Terry Photo.
Fantastic. Well, you got anything else you'd like to add, Tom?
I do actually. I do quite want to ask you if your Canon AE1 is. Do you know what year? Do you know what year it is?
Oh, here we go. Here comes the geek.
No. So it's not. It's nothing really geeky. It's just that there were, for the LA Olympics in 1984, Canon did a limited run of ones with Olympic branding, and they have the rings on and stuff, and they look rad.
Yeah, no, I did see those when I was looking, and I don't think it is one of those fancy pants ones. It is. It is one that is mechanically sound, though, which is the most important thing. And most of them are, at the moment, they all seem to be. I had a couple before that ended up just going in the bin because they just all glue up. But this one is literally bulletproof.
That's it. They're 35 years old. If you get a good one, lucky you.
Yeah, hang on to it.
Damn right. Well, listen, Jack, an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much. Really, really appreciate it. And go and check out Jack's work. It's fantastic. And have a lovely day.
No problem at all. It's obviously one of those topics where you could talk at length about any of those subjects for an entire day. So if there are people that have got sort of more questions, then you're more than welcome just to ping me a message. I'm quite happy to give people a kind of nudge in the right direction if there's something they've been mulling over. I'm not claiming to be the oracle of photography by any means. I just kind of punch my way through it. And hopefully if I've made some mistakes, then someone needs a question answered and it might save you making a mistake. So yeah, feel free to reach out. And cheers for having me on.
Anytime.
Excellent. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to stay in touch, there are a number of options for you to reach out. We can be emailed at info@exposenegative.com, and you can find us on the website at exposenegative.com or on Instagram at xnegative. We're pretty good at responding to DMs on there, and we're also on Twitter at exposenegative. You can find us personally on our own private accounts on Instagram. Tom is tombarnes.com and I am just Greg Fennell. Cheers. Thanks for listening.